Okay, thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon. We really appreciate it. This is our QM Research Online Conference. And I'm going to be posting a lot in the chat for you. So you'll have everything that you need for the afternoon. So just hang on for a second and we'll get all your questions answered, hopefully with this information that we share with you. My name is Barbara Birch, and I am the Manager of Research and Development at Quality Matters, and I really appreciate all the presenters and attendees joining us this afternoon. I would like to mention a couple of points of order for the day. First of all, with your audio setup, the main thing is that if you're hearing me, things are working for you. You will not be using your mic. Only the presenters will be using their mic today. We are going to have closed captioning available, and I'm going to share the links for those with you as soon as I get finished with the presentation. Okay, so each of the sessions that we're going to be having this afternoon in this event are going to be recorded, and the recordings will be shared with all the registrants, as well as being live on the QM YouTube channel beginning December 2nd. What I'm going to do right now is give you a little bit of information about each of the sessions that are going to be given to you as choices for the day, and I'll show the links for both the sessions and the live captioning, but I will also then, after I get finished with my introduction, post all of the information so you can copy and paste it. I'll go ahead and let me see if I can get the captioning link for you right now for what we're doing. Okay, so there you go for the captioning. Each Zoom room that you attend this afternoon, whichever session you're in, there's going to be a host who's going to be monitoring the Q&A, and will give each presenter at the end a list of the questions. So we'll have time at the end of each session for that. The chat should be used for any just general commentary between all of you who are attending the webinar. And if you need any kind of a technical assistance, the host will also be watching that. Okay. Okay, so to begin, our first session will start at 1:20. And we have 3 different choices for that. So 3 different rooms with a different URL for each one. The first one is going to be on National Survey of Student Engagement and QM data on the online student experience with Shimon Sarraf in this room where we are currently. So if you would want to attend that session for your first time slot, you can just stay right here. And I've already posted the captioning link for that session. The second choice in the first time slot will be Dr. Roger Wen from California State University, East Bay. And he's going to be talking about the data and analysis on QM impact to students' learning that they've been able to obtain at CSU East Bay. The third choice for this time slot is going to be Dr. Patrick Dempsey and Dr. Sarah Martin, and they'll be in room 3 doing designing for change using the community of inquiry and transformative learning to create authentic learning experiences. So it will be those 3 for the first time slots. We will have a 5-minute break between the first and the second time slots to give you a chance just to get a drink of water and think about which room you would like to go into for the next session. But I will tell you, for that session, we welcome Dr. Karen Swan in this room where we are right now, for using learning analytics, the benefits and pitfalls. And then the second choice will be in room 2 for disseminating research on online education, best practices for doing that, with Dr. Mary Ellen Dello Strito. And then similarly, we will also have a little break, just 5 minutes between the second and the third session. And the third session will start at 3 o'clock with practical methods for designing research studies and analyzing data in educational settings with Dr. Whitney Zimmerman in this room where we are right now. And then in the second room, we're going to have online instructor competencies, motivations, attitudes, and values, what the research literature tells us, with Dr. Kay Shattuck and Dr. Will Deal. I do want to mention that getting set for each of the sessions, we're going to have the hosts in each session make the presenters into panelists. So we appreciate your patience with us for doing all of those things. And in just a moment, I am going to be putting links to all the sessions so that you will be able to copy and paste them. Okay, I wanted to go over asking questions in the webinar. As I mentioned, you'll want to use the Q&A box for your questions for the panelists, the presenters. The host will help with the answering of those questions at the end. And then for chatting, just use the chat box, any comments that you want to make. And then just if you're wanting to tweet out while you're here today, you are certainly welcome to do that, and we just give you a little bit of information there. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and allow for our first presenter in room 1 to share his screen, but hang on and don't go anywhere just yet, because I'm going to go ahead and post all of the links that you're going to need for today. And what I would recommend is for you to copy and paste all of them, and then you'll have them at your fingertips. Okay, I just went ahead and pasted all of the links for the day. I will mention, while Shimon is getting set up, that at the end of the afternoon at 3:45, after the third session, we are going to come back to this room, the main room, for the closing. And I just would like to have, okay, someone says it looks cut off. Hold on just a sec, I'll repost those. Okay, let's see. Okay, here comes the part that didn't come through before. So you should have all the links that you need. Okay, I'm just going to ask if anybody has a question right now, go ahead and post. Let's see. I do see some people say that they didn't see the links. Is everybody seeing them now? No? Okay, let me repost them. Sure, I will post again. Hold on just a moment. Okay, I can post on the chat. It looks like it cuts off at a certain amount of text. So let me post the last little bit. Okay, so from 3 to 3:45 and the closing. Okay, and I'm also going to post this. Okay, I'm looking at the Q&A just to make sure that we've got everybody seeing everything they want to see. Yes, somebody has a question about the breakout rooms. They're not really breakout rooms, they're really separate rooms. So you need to go to the new URL. All right, somebody's asking if I could put this in a Word document. My screens are a little bit taken up here, but I will try to do that. Hold on just a moment. Yeah, actually, I'm not sure about attaching a Word document in the chat. I do have a Google Doc. Hold on just a moment. Good suggestion from Enoch. Oh, let me go ahead and make sure that everybody can see this. Shared. Okay, see if that shareable link works for you. To anybody new, I have posted all of the links. I just posted a shareable link for the Google Doc. I just posted a shareable link to the Google Doc. That should get folks in there. I just posted to anyone who has the link can view. Somebody just said you might need to refresh your page if you're trying to view. The link sharing is on. Are folks seeing the link? Yes, you do have to leave this room if you want to attend other rooms. Okay, well, thanks for your patience, everyone. It seems like it should be working, that everybody can see the links of where they want to go. And at this point in time, okay, hold on just a second. I'm going to turn things over to Shimon Sarraf. Shimon, are you ready to
I'm also, yes, I am, Barbara. Thank you.
Okay, so hold on just a second. Let me
Can you hear me just fine and the slides are showing up properly?
Yes, I can hear you just fine, and I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon. And if you are all ready, I will go ahead and the recording is going.
Okay. Well, thanks again, Barbara, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to talk with the QM community about our joint collaborative research project based on QM standards and how students experience them on campus. I'm the Assistant Director for Survey Operations and Project Services at the National Survey of Student Engagement, also known as NSSE. NSSE is housed within the Indiana University Center for Postsecondary Research within the School of Education here in Bloomington, Indiana. So to start things off, let's review today's agenda. We'll start by reviewing the goals for the presentation and what we hope to accomplish, then say a few words about NSSE. We'll then review our 3 research questions, data sources used, characteristics of the institutions and students being used in the study, followed by answers to the research questions and a few summary words. Based upon quite a bit of experience that I have with conducting surveys and encouraging large numbers of institutions to do certain things to increase their survey response rates, I'll provide a few remarks at the end in terms of recommendations, in terms of increasing survey response rates. We've done quite a number of experiments over the years, so I look forward to sharing what we've learned. So there are 3 major goals for today's presentation. First, I'd like all of you to better understand how well college students' experiences align with Quality Matters course design standards across a diverse group of students at 21 U.S. colleges and universities. Second, I hope to thoroughly explore with you the level of variation in student online learning experiences. Research studies of this kind often focus on the average student experience, but there's a lot one can learn from looking at the variation in results within any particular group. Lastly, in some small way, I hope these results contribute to improving the learning experience for online students. After all, NSSE, it's about actionable information, providing actionable information for colleges and universities to improve the undergraduate learning experience. A little bit of information about NSSE before we dive into the details of our research collaboration with Quality Matters. NSSE has been providing 4-year colleges and universities information about their undergraduate student experiences in and outside of the classroom since 2000. Over 1,600 4-year colleges and universities have participated over the years, mostly here in the US and Canada. NSSE's content reflects decades of student development theory and research. Its focus is on the frequency of certain curricular and co-curricular student behaviors, as well as student perceptions of the college environment. Both have been found to relate to desirable college outcomes like student retention and cognitive development. Lastly, schools use NSSE to inform institutional improvement efforts and discussions about why their curriculum and co-curriculum are working well or not on any particular campus. So here are the 3 primary research questions I'll be discussing today. The first asks about the extent of students experiencing QM-related standards for online learning and how results vary across different student groups. The second focuses on whether students at certain institutions are experiencing QM standards more than students at other institutions. Lastly, we explore the relationship between student satisfaction with their online learning experiences and activities related to Quality Matters standards. I use 2 data sources for answering these 3 research questions. The first is the core NSSE instrument that asks about students' background and demographic characteristics. I didn't use any NSSE engagement measures to answer these research questions, But if you'd like to get a gist of the survey's content, see the reference sheet about our 10 scales called engagement indicators. You should see a link for that in the chat box. The second data source for this study are the experimental online learning experiences item set, the result of a collaboration between QM and NSSE staff. Every year, we administer experimental questions for a variety of purposes, including to inform changes to our core survey questions, to explore topics of public interest, or to advance our psychometric portfolio. Barbara has also, or is posting a link to this item set in the chat box as well, so you can take a look at that. Both the core survey and experimental questions were administered together during the spring of 2018. Institutions were selected to administer the experimental items based on their substantial online learning population. Let's take a quick look at our sample's characteristics. We had a diverse set of 21 schools administer this set of items after their students completed the core NSSE instrument. As I said before, all had substantial online learning populations. Some of the other characteristics of this institution, you can see there's a long list here. The 21 schools had a median of 74% full-time student enrollment, 61% female, 22% of students taking all courses online, 39% minority students, and a median value of 3,600 total undergraduate enrollment. 4 out of the 21 schools, which I call high online enrollment schools, had 50% or more of their NSSE 2018 respondents taking all courses online, 2 of which were entirely online institutions. There were no for-profit schools in the sample, and about 1/3 of the schools were private, not-for-profit institutions. The rest were publics. At the student level, I analyzed approximately 5,000 respondents spread across the 21 institutions. Some of the institutions had a very large number of respondents, so in order to avoid significant bias in our results, we down-weighted these schools, thus leaving a weighted sample size of about 3,500 students. The final sample, as you can see from the list on the right, the majority were female adult learners taking their courses entirely online during the spring term. And I'll let you review the rest on your own for a second. So how did we identify online learners in order to administer the experimental questions? There are 2 consecutive questions on the core NSSE instrument that were useful for this purpose. The first question asked the respondent how many courses they were taking for credit during the current academic term. If they answered anything above 0, a follow-up question asked how many were entirely online. Only students who reported taking 1 or more entirely online courses were able to answer the additional questions about their online learning experiences. So what did we ask students about their online learning experiences? Take a look at the item set, which Barbara provided a link to before. There were a total of 17 questions specifically related to the most important QM course design standards. For the purpose of this study, I divided them into 2 groups. The first I call effective course structure items, which included the first 12 items on the survey. The second group of items I call engaged online learning items, and are found under the third group of items, 5 items in total. On this slide, I've listed a few examples of both types of items. Note that the question stem and associated response options differ between the 2 groups of items. Effective course structure items use a "to what extent do your courses" approach, while the engaged online learning items use an "about how often have you done" approach when asking students about their experiences with the different QM standards. As we review the results, keep in mind the values associated with the response options ranging from 4 to 0 for the course structure items and 4 to 1 for the engaged learning items. There was 1 less response option for those 5 related to the engaged learning items. I'd like to point out two other questions from the experimental item set that are key to understanding the analytical sample I use for answering the research questions. Just to be sure we're truly getting respondents that were thinking about entirely online course experiences when completing the experimental questions, we asked the question on the left of the slide: how does the instruction for the online courses you were thinking about in the previous questions occur? 83% of the respondents said or responded with the first option, only taught online. The other 17% responded that the courses they were thinking about did in fact have some level of in-person interaction. Ultimately, 83%, the 83% that said their courses were only taught online were included in the analyses I'm talking to you about today. To give you a sense of what type of entirely online courses this 83% took, the question on the right revealed that the vast majority of the respondents, about 85%, reported that their courses had some level of asynchronicity. Only 15% reported their courses were fully synchronous. To make for a more compact and reliable analysis, I created two scales based on the two sets of items previously mentioned: effective course structure and engaged online learning. I created the scales by simply averaging responses to the 12 or the 5 items, depending upon which scale it was. For example, if someone answered very much to all the course structure questions, they received a scale score of 4. Alternatively, if someone responded never to all of the 5 engaged online learning items, their score was 1. As you see from the histogram off to the right, a large number of students scored 4 on one or both of these scales. 35% of course structure scores were at the highest level, and 25% of the engaged online learning scores were at the highest level. For those of you who are into psychometrics, both scales appeared to measure a single underlying construct based on several different types of tests that I ran. So I think that's good news in terms of reporting back reliable information. So let's talk about the results. Our first research question asks about the extent of college online learning experiences aligning with QM standards and whether these results vary by student characteristics. We'll talk about the effective course structure questions first. Here are the 12 questions about course structure and a bar graph that reflects the percentage of students reporting that their online courses provided them very much or quite a bit within these 12 quality matter standard related areas. It is pretty clear that the vast majority of students indicated that their courses provided these things. At the top of the list, 88% say their courses provided a clearly stated grading policy and learning goals. At the bottom of the list, 75% said instructions for using technology were provided at a high level. I'd say overall this is good news, as only a small minority of students aren't experiencing these QM-related course design features. Now let's take a look at how effective online course scale scores vary or not by different student characteristics. In other words, are there any groups of students that appear to experience more effective online courses than others? As I mentioned previously, using scales is a more reliable way to evaluate dimensions of quality matter standards like course structure. To answer this question, I employ what is commonly known as a box and whiskers graph. A few words of explanation though, to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of our understanding here, because I'll be using these again and again in other slides. So each box shows the 75th percentile, that's sort of the top line, the top of the box, along with the 25th percentile, or the bottom of the box. The 50% of the scores between the top and bottom of each box are considered part of the interquartile range. Any vertical lines coming out of the top or the bottom of the boxes represents some portion of the top 25% and bottom 25% of scores. The small dots on the bottom of the graphs represent individual student scores and are considered outliers of the distribution. The red dots represent the 50th percentile score or median. The takeaway from these graphs is that all student types, 75% of scores are at or above a score of 3, which is associated with the quite a bit response option of the individual questions. Some scores fall below a 2, which corresponds to some, but not that many at all, which is good news, I think. Regardless of the student type, median scores are all near the top of the scale or very close to it. So for all practical purposes, there doesn't appear to be any group that is experiencing a meaningfully higher or lower level of course structure. Let's compare how the students at the 4 high online enrollment schools talked about earlier compared to their peers at the 17 other schools. Recall that these schools had 50% or more of their NSSE respondents reporting all their courses were online. The distribution of scores at these 4 schools indicate a greater level of course structure being experienced. The median value for the group is about 3.8, while for the others it is about 3.5. The interquartile range is pretty much centered between 3 and 4 points for both groups, so the vast majority of students are getting a very respectable level of course structure as part of their curriculum. Now let's see how scores distribute by academic major fields for seniors in this data set. First-year students are excluded here because they're less likely to actually be taking courses within their intended major, so we're going to leave those to the side. For the most part, 75% of respondents, regardless of major, had a score of 3 or higher. Not much difference seen in terms of medians, except by comparing the bottom and top majors, such as engineering and biological sciences, compared to social services professions, where there's a notable median difference of about 0.5 point. Let's move on and look at the results for the engaged online learning questions and related scale. Results for the 5 engaged online learning questions show a good bit of variation in the percentage of respondents reporting very often and often, considerably more than the course structure questions. For example, 83% of students report frequently applying key information from assigned readings, but only 56% report frequently exchanging ideas, feedback, and questions with instructors. There's room for improvement with faculty and student interactions, but on other engagement fronts, the frequency of behaviors is already quite high in terms of beneficial activities suggested by QM standards. We can also review the distribution of engaged online learning scale scores by the same student background and demographic variables used for analyzing course structure scale scores. In contrast to the course structure results, we see considerably more difference between types of students. Seniors, part-time, minority, and female students all show noticeably higher median values by about 1/4 point. The interquartile range for their peers, such as first-year and non-minority students, dips deeply below 3 points. Now we look at engaged learning scores of students at high online enrollment schools. The low online enrollment schools interquartile range stretches to the top of the scale, while the high group, 75th percentile, is at about 3.5 with a median value about 1/4 point below where the low group is. If you recall from a few slides ago, this pattern was reversed with course structure scores. The students at high online enrollment schools before had a higher median course structure score relative to their peers. So looking across academic major fields again, we see median scores at or slightly above 3 for the engaged online learning scale. The distribution of scores appears to vary more than course structure scores, with almost all institutions' interquartile ranges dipping below 3. Communications and social services professions majors show the highest median value, while biological science, other STEM fields, and business show the lowest median values. Overall, there is more differences between majors in terms of engaged online learning scores compared to structure scores, but things still don't vary tremendously between majors within this scale. So descriptive statistics like the ones I just presented are informative, but using a statistical model can help isolate the independent relationship of any student characteristic with the two scales. Model results highlight positive, negative, and no relationships for a small handful of variables relative to both scales. Some consistent results across the two scales stuck out for me, namely the positive relationship for underrepresented minority students, the negative relationship for males, and no relationship found for first-generation students. All these results are in relation to their peers. So in the case of underrepresented minority students, when we say there's a positive relationship, we're saying that their scores are higher than non-minority students. Also notable was the powerful positive relationship of the effective course structure scale score on engaged online learning. For the most part, I found very modest, statistically significant differences between groups, amounting to about 0.15 points or less. Now, for the results for our second research question about institutional performance, are there certain institutions that appear to do a better job aligning with QM standards, whether it be intentional or not? When I was analyzing this, I had no information about who may have been applying QM standards or not, so keep that in mind as you look at these results. Here we see the course structure scale score distribution by institution sorted by median value. Keep in mind that the institution ID is something I created in order to keep the anonymity of all schools, which is required by our participation agreement. All schools sign a participation agreement. We promise some things and they promise others, and this is one of them, so I can't divulge that information. It's pretty clear that based on the median value, some institutions appear to be structuring their courses in ways more consistent with QM standards than others. Comparing the three top and bottom schools, we see a very substantial difference in median value approaching 1 point. The good news from my perspective is that about 75% of students at most schools score a 2.8 or higher, just below someone reporting quite a bit for all the structure questions. That still leaves about 25% of the students at each school distributing themselves somewhere between 1 and 2.8 on the course structure scale. So there's still room for making improvements in this area. There's still quite a number of students that aren't reporting things very highly. Looking at the score distributions for the engaged online learning scale for the 21 schools, we do see some institutions based on their median values aligning with QM standards at a higher level than others. The difference between the top schools and bottom schools is about a half a point or more in terms of median value. The majority of schools in the middle, though, are only a quarter point different from one another. This graph also clearly shows that scores vary within schools quite significantly. Let's combine institutional average results from both scales to give us a different perspective on this question of whether some institutions appear to be aligning with QM standards at a higher level than others. The scatter plot of the 21 schools has the engaged online learning scale on the y-axis and the effective online course structure scale on the x-axis. We see a few things clearly using this graphing approach. First, all schools on average are scoring highly on both measures. And second, we see noticeable differences between the top and bottom schools with the majority of schools clustered pretty closely together. Also note that there is a very strong positive correlation between these two measures, with 2 institutions demonstrating there's always going to be a couple outliers in any data set, and you can see those, I think, pretty clearly. How do these 2 online learning measures relate to outcomes? That's the nature of our third research question. The one outcome-like measure we asked about on the survey was related to student satisfaction with their online learning experiences. In this slide, I present a bar graph showing the percentage of respondents reporting their online learning experiences are excellent or good by 5 levels of course structure scale scores. The differences between each group is clearly substantial. 13%, for example, of the respondents experiencing the lowest levels of optimal course structure, or those that score less than a 2 on the scale, report that their online experiences have been excellent or good. Compare this to the 98% of respondents at the top of the scale that report their experiences have been excellent or good. So to answer our research question, yes, satisfaction with the online learning experience does vary in a systematic way by level of course structure. For purposes of optimizing the online learning experience for students, institutions would be wise to pay attention to the individual QM standards this scale is comprised of. So how does satisfaction relate to engaged online learning scale scores? They definitely relate, as you can see from this graph, but the relationship is less pronounced compared with our course structure scores. 63% of the respondents experiencing the lowest levels of engaged online learning, or those that score less than 2 on the scale, report that their online experiences have been excellent or good. Compare this to the 96% of the respondents at the top of the scale that report their experiences have been excellent or good. One question to ponder is, what does it mean when you have extremely low engagement as measured in this study, but still have a good chance of being highly satisfied with your online learning experience? My guess, based on other student development research, is that it has to do with expectations. If students come to the online learning experience with low expectations as far as engagement, then they'll be less likely to be frustrated or disappointed. I'm interested in hearing your hypotheses for explaining these results, so don't be shy to use the chat box. So let's quickly review what the data has told us today about our 3 research questions. First, student experiences with effective course structure generally appear aligned with QM standards, and there isn't much difference between different types of students. Engaged online learning scores vary considerably and are also high, generally speaking. We did find substantial differences in engaged learning by different student types based on descriptive statistics. Though results show high scores, some students experience a high level of structure or engagement, so those are populations that would be good to understand better in future research studies. In terms of comparing institutions, certain schools do appear better aligned with quality matter standards than others, but overall differences are not that great. The 21 schools we looked at appear to be doing well on average with effective course structure. There appears to be more room for improvement with engaged online learning experiences, though overall these results are positive too. And lastly, student satisfaction with the overall online learning experience appears to relate to both scales used in this study. I think this presentation's research findings are a good start at understanding the student experience as they relate to best practice with online learning. For the future, I plan to explore comments students left in the open text box at the end of the survey, which should provide additional insights into this group of online students. One other word about this set of questions before I talk about increasing response rates. Starting with this spring's NSSE administration, there is a new NSSE consortium for online learning that uses this set of questions. Any NSSE participating school can join the consortium as part of their standard NSSE administration. In this upcoming NSSE administration, 15 schools will participate in the consortium. And so I think I can speak for both Barbara and I. We're excited about sort of the prospects of continuing to collect more and more information about online learning here in the US and in Canada. So that's some really good news. One of my roles at NSSE, like I said before, is to study survey data quality and figure out ways to increase response rates and the probability of students answering all survey questions. I'd like to share a few thoughts about increasing college student participation in surveys. Before I get to the recommendations, two things to keep in mind when thinking about increasing response rates. First, many students are over-surveyed and tired of being asked to complete another survey. You're probably well aware of that. Though I don't have empirical evidence, except for the declining response rates, this is my working assumption as I go about trying to increase response rates for our participating schools. Second, technology has changed rapidly over the past decade, and it can be extremely helpful with reaching students and encouraging them to complete their survey. For instance, about 8 years ago, the percentage of students using mobile devices to complete NSSE was about 4%. Now the percentage is around 40%, with even higher rates at some schools. Learning management systems are ubiquitous these days as well, and schools are beginning to figure out ways to use them for maximizing their response rates. And I'll talk more on this a bit later. So you're not alone if you're concerned about response rates. It's definitely hard to ignore that rates have dropped over the past decades, which is why NSSE spends time figuring out ways to increase student participation. And you can see the downward trend in this graph. On average, response rates have declined over the past decade for institutions of varying enrollment size, but that trend has been slowing in recent years, thankfully. I think institutions are paying more attention to it, and some of the things that we've done at NSSE, I think, have impacted rates as well. These trend lines also belie, I think, tremendous variation in rates within any of these groups. Some institutions are managing to get much higher response rates than the average school. And of course, some institutions do achieve lower rates, unfortunately. But fortunately, our research suggests that NSSE population survey estimates stay relatively constant even when an institution has a low response rate, as long as they have around 50 respondents for their first year and senior populations. This points, I think, to the fact that there's minimal non-response bias, as we say in the survey research world. Regardless, we know that response rates are the key indicator of survey quality for many of our participating schools, and that results are sometimes dismissed because a certain rate isn't achieved. Hence all of our efforts to keep finding new and better ways to increase response rates. So what are the steps you can take to increase response rates, keeping in mind there's no single solution that will work for all institutions? The first one, no surprise, use incentives, survey incentives when possible. We found 3% to 5 percentage points increases for lottery incentives. Guaranteed incentives, we see considerably higher response rate increases, although we haven't done any controlled studies with either of these. These estimates are based on correlational studies. We've also found, and this is more anecdotal from our institutions, is that students really appreciate the possibility of winning the most current technological gadget, whether that's the newest version of Apple iPad or some other Android device. So keep those things in mind. And with all of these recommendations, there are papers that we have that kind of support some of these assertions. So if you are interested in more details, just send me an email. The second recommendation has to do with posting survey links to learning management systems. We started experimenting with this back in 2015 and have found it to be very effective for some schools. Many schools now take the unique student survey links we provide and post them within their learning management systems. So when the student clicks on that link, they'll be directed right to their survey without any other authentication steps. So some schools have doubled or tripled their response rates using this approach, although some schools didn't see much success at all. I think on average, the one sort of controlled experiment we did looked like on average a 5 percentage point increase in response rates could be expected, which is quite substantial for some schools who are struggling to increase their response rates. Third recommendation is to be sure you promote your survey. Don't sit back and think that only sending out an email with a survey link is going to yield fantastic results. If you're lucky, they will. That's all that you'll need to do. But I think for most institutions, they're going to have to promote their survey. If the project is important enough, then promote the survey by advertising in your campus newspaper or through social media. Some of our institutions, they pitch tents in the middle of campus and encourage students to participate in the survey. Fourth point, optimize surveys for smartphones. I mentioned before, they're really being used widely. Make sure you think carefully about what the experience is like for mobile respondents. Our research suggests that students are more likely to abandon a survey without answering a single question if what they initially see isn't designed correctly. We have our mobile optimized survey on our website. You can find that under our instruments webpage if you're interested in looking at what the experience is like for our respondents. We've spent a lot of time thinking about that and have been using it successfully for several years now. Let me know. You can send me an email if you can't find it. And lastly, you'll want to coordinate with other campus survey projects. It's very critical. Institutions are becoming more and more aware that coordinating campus survey efforts is critical. It's time well spent, in my professional opinion. Getting multiple surveys on the student's part around the same time can confuse them as well as annoy them. Two bad things, which can result in lower response rates for your survey project. I suppose my final recommendation is to conduct your own survey experiments if you have the time and resources, so you can identify what works best for your campus. Within any of our experiments, there are things that work better for some institutions than others. So, if it's a very important project, you want to spend the time to do some experiments on your own to see what's the best way to increase response. Thanks for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions now or by email later.
All right. Well, it looks like we do have a couple of questions, and I want to thank you so much, Shimon. That was an excellent presentation, and I'm so glad that this is going to be captured in the recordings. So I'll go ahead and go with the questions and then give directions after that. Let's see. The first question that we have is, what kind of incentives could we offer to students?
Okay, well, our participating institutions offer a wide variety of incentives, everything from gift cards to Amazon or Walmart to the local ice cream shop. So there's a tremendous amount of variation. If I were to and I think I mentioned it before, if I were going to pick something, I would probably pick your high-tech items, iPads, iPods, any of those sort of cutting-edge technology that students are very anxious to get their hands on. I'd recommend using them. Of course, if you can afford a guaranteed incentive where you give it to every single student that responds to the survey, I think, as small of an amount as like $5 applied to a campus gift card could be beneficial to your overall response rates.
Okay, let's see if there are no other questions. There was something in the chat though, where from Daniel White, he said, Shimon, great job. Maybe you can ask 21 partner institutions to share faculty feedback forms that students fill out to provide data on faculty engagement levels and levels of feedback which are reflected in QM. He says, we use these two indicators to make the case for remediation of faculty.
Oh, that's interesting. I'm glad you sort of brought up the issue. FESI, the Faculty Survey of Student Engagement, is also administering a set of questions based upon the NSSE version. And so we'll be able to potentially link these two sets of questions from, the student perspective and the faculty perspective. I actually don't know how many of the 15 institutions participating in the upcoming administration are also administering the FESI version, but I'm very curious, so I'll check that once the presentation ends. But thanks for your comment.
Okay, let's see. It looks like a couple of other questions. Somebody's asking if the slides will be available after the sessions. And yes, we are going to be sending out all the materials related to today's sessions on December 2nd. So it will take a bit, but we will have all of that available. Then we have a question, is it important when we do the survey in terms of timing, like, for example, in the middle of a term, after a term?
Well, it really depends on the survey. For the NSSE instrument, it's important that you administer it during the semester, and you don't want to wait too long. I suppose you could probably administer it soon after the end of the semester, but we really like for students to be in their classes and engaged in what they're usually engaged in while they're taking that survey. We also don't recommend administering it too close to the beginning of the semester. There's, things may not have gotten into full swing, and their results could be a little off because of that. We did implement an experiment this past year where we experimented with the time of the day. I don't think this contact asked about the time of the day, but more the time of the semester. But I'll just mention that sending out the messages, the email recruitment messages at different times of the day didn't seem to matter overall. Of course, there are individual institutions. We had over 100 institutions participate in the experiment. And there were some institutions where it did matter what time of the day the messages were sent out, but overall, in the aggregate, it did not matter. So I thought that was a very interesting finding.
Okay, thanks. And it looks like there is another kind of question that came into the chat that I'll mention. Would you consider adding learning styles as part of the student demographical information or data set?
That's a good question. Learning styles, as in, yeah, it has come up. The survey is really focused on behaviors and perceptions primarily. That's what we've been historically. But if something does relate to engagement, it's something that we would probably consider either testing or creating. We have something called topical modules. If there was enough interest among our institutions, it's something that we might consider adding to our sort of menu of potential add-ons. I don't see that being added to the core instrument, but I know a little bit about learning styles, and I think they can have a tremendous impact on how students engage. So it's an interesting question that I'll share with others during our next meeting, or send out an email right now. Thank you for that question.
All right, well, thanks so much, Shimon. I'm going to stop the recording now, and then I'll give a few more instructions.
Okay, thanks everyone.